when we first started thinking about putting on a conference, and we were looking at, well, what are the ingredients that you need to have in order to be able to put on a conference? One of the things that we looked at here is we said, well, so you got these kind of companies that have done some recent ICOs, Dragon Chain, Storm, et cetera, Archain. And we said, okay, you've got Perkins Coie, largest law firm in the space. And then we said, well, you've also got cloud providers who are now looking at blockchain as legitimate businesses and legitimate business units. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to sit down with Marley Gray early on, and we were able to get Microsoft to commit to coming and sharing the space with us here. So I want to introduce to you JT Rose. He is the product marketing manager at Microsoft, and he's going to talk to us about building blockchain products on Azure. JT. Oh, good music. Thank you.
Hello. Can't see anybody. You're here. All right. Nice to see everybody here. Thanks for the introduction. I'm JT Rose, and I lead product marketing and growth for Azure Blockchain. And what that really means is inside of Microsoft, Azure is really sort of the spiritual center of the work going on to understand what multi-party means across many of our crown jewels in identity, in data, in business applications and SaaS. And I've been on the team for about 18 months, working with the engineering group and working with customers to just start to understand what it is that we can provide and how we can add value here. So I don't know if this thing is going to click. There we go. So I lead the sort of commercialization of Microsoft's blockchain offerings, and I'm feeling very fortunate to be here today. So I think I'll start off with this, and I don't need to go into too much detail about what blockchain is and how it works with this crew, but I think one of the things that's exciting about an event like this is that you get exposure to just how broad the surface area of blockchain is. And so when we sat down and started working with customers and started working just internally on where was it that Microsoft needed to focus, there was a lot of opportunity for us, and we had to be super guided, I think, by what our customers were asking from us. And where they really wanted to focus was on where blockchain could help them better interact with customers and suppliers and partners with whom they shared sort of a business process. They didn't initially know to ask us for that, but as we worked with what would become groups of companies working together as a consortium, what they really wanted to do was sort of build a new type of shared application on a set of blockchain rails, on top of which they could more effectively or more efficiently share a business process. I have a couple of examples here. These are real examples, but I think what excited us in Azure and what excited us at Microsoft is that we realized early on this is a new type of application. It's an application that not one customer is coming and saying, I want 5,000 seats of foo. It's 10 customers coming together and saying, we want to build a net new application to solve a problem that we share or to address the cost of business that affects us all. And I think over time what we found is that those applications were not just relevant to the initial consortium that wanted to build it, but often were forming the foundations of industry utilities that other market participants in these concentric circles of partners and suppliers that they brought to the table could also take advantage of. So from a Microsoft perspective, we obviously wanted to be able to lend Azure services to the creation of these new applications, but as we worked, we also understood that there was gaps in our capabilities. There were gaps in the service portfolio that we had, and we would need to lean in and create new offerings and new services to kind of plug those gaps, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. I'll give an example of just something we've been working on for a while, but I think is illustrative of sort of the opportunity here and the role that we play. Microsoft has a huge gaming business, Xbox, as many of you know, and each month we have to reconcile 8 million transactions with our partner Ubisoft, who publishes content on that platform. And suffice it to say, the royalty contracts are hundreds of pages deep. For every transaction you can imagine, we have to pay Ubisoft, we have to pay FIFA, we have to pay Manchester United, and you have to pay Wayne Rooney. And that's for every game and for every title, and it gets very complicated very quick, and there's a very long reconciliation process that's largely embarrassingly sort of not paper-based but Excel-based. It's costly to manage. There's a lot of errors in it. And so we started exploring with Ubisoft, is there a better way for us to do this on a ledger to sort of codify the terms of these royalty contracts, put them in a smart contract, and have them self-execute each month. And so we started running that as a parallel process earlier this year and sort of fully moved over just a few months ago. And what you get is sort of a much more streamlined system for our Xbox finance team and for our content publishers on the platform. I think what gets us really excited about this is now we've had other game publishers come to us and say, well, we share the same problem with you. This is an issue that we know we have. Can we use this platform as well? And these are big publishers, and they're also small publishers. For a small publisher, you can imagine, even if it's not sort of meaningfully reducing the time that we settle a royalty payment to them, they could perhaps take that immutable record of accounts receivable and go to a bank and say, I'm interested in creating the next new game. Can I take a loan out against this accounts receivable? So I think the network starts to grow, not just in the number of members on the network, but the number of transactions that move through it. And it's a really exciting thing, I think, for us. One thing I'll touch on, I think Xbox is a good example of it, but that we've started to see across financial services, across supply chain, across a variety of industries, is that the sort of commonality of use cases is actually quite simple. When there is an asset, physical or digital or financial, that is moving across organizational boundaries with a requirement for audit. So I need to go back and understand the terms under which that asset moved, or perhaps stipulate the terms under which it is allowed to move with a mechanism like a smart contract. Then that becomes a scenario where those multiple organizations want to come together, build an application, and we can step in and help them. I have some examples here, and I know I'm short of time, so I don't want to belabor the point, but the asset can vary depending on the industry that it's in. Blockchain is a super horizontal technology, and we're finding that it has implications in a variety of industries. 3M has built an application with us to help their logistics and pharmaceutical partners track and verify the integrity of high-value pharmaceuticals as they move across a custodial chain from a lab to a retail shelf in a pharmacy. Webjet, I think, is a great example of a technology company. They're sort of similar to an Expedia in the United States, and they were managing across hundreds of hotel partners, airlines, and rental car agencies, reservations that, especially during travel season, was becoming increasingly burdensome for them to keep a ledger, sort of a shared record of truth of what was available and what was not, digital inventory. So the asset can change wildly sort of across industries, and while the financial services sector, I think, was the first that came to us ready to explore this, what we found is that it has implications across industries. I'm understanding that these slides will be available to everybody here, but this is just, I think, a small sample of customers across industries that have come to us asking, if blockchain is applicable for them. So maybe I can skip ahead to what we're building and where we've seen opportunities for Azure to sort of add value. The first thing I think we realized, and we announced some work in this area earlier last fall, is that customers wanted tremendous transaction throughput, database-like latency, and some of the early consensus algorithms and some of the early, ledger construction approaches just didn't lend itself to that. And that was some work that we're doing in the open with some of the ledgers themselves, trying to address this sort of longer-term problem of how do you create an enterprise-grade ledger that can deliver on the throughput and latency requirements that would be needed for a commodities trading scenario, for example. And we know this is sort of a long pole issue that we need to solve. And there's a tremendous amount of work going on in Microsoft research with the ledgers themselves to try to address this with secure hardware. The second thing is smart contract development is still pretty kludgy. I think you have to write it in a language that perhaps your developers are not used to using. If you write it in that language, you can't use it across consortium participants that perhaps want to use a different ledger. There's no the sort of concept of a multi-ledger environment is difficult to execute. And so there's some work that needs to be done, I think, in the perhaps offering an abstraction layer that allows you to write the code in the language of your choice, and then we're able to translate it to a ledger or the ledgers of your choice that meet your needs. I think the last bucket is really where the bulk of our effort the last, I'd say 12 months is really focused. Aside from the ledger decision, you're really building an application that multiple companies, multiple organizations, entities with different roles and responsibilities are going to have to use. Building that thing is difficult in and of itself, requires a lot of non-blockchain capabilities just in cloud development. And we felt like we could help there. We felt like that was sort of a sweet spot for us. Getting customers, if you could write a CSV file, if you could write a smart contract in Solidity or Go or Java, you should be able to drop that in to a harness that sort of auto-creates an application for you, so you're not spending so much time just scaffolding together an application, worrying about UI, worrying about linking blockchain-based identities to a federated identity system that your organization is using. Those are the sorts of things that are not really blockchain specific. Those are the things that are just basic cloud development, and that we should be able to help with. So these were the sorts of things that we heard developers come to us and say, that it was taking months to develop just their first application. I have a great idea. I have buy-in from my leadership. I want to go develop this application, but man, I'm spending a lot of time just trying to figure out how to build a web app. How do I link this application that I'm building with the existing IT infrastructure that I have today? How do I get off the blockchain island and start connecting this to SAP or Salesforce.com or the systems of record that I'm already using today to manage this process? How can I make those connections? Like I said, there was this sort of gap between the ledgers that we were initially helping them to deploy into their Azure subscriptions and the tools that they were already using to manage this process today. They didn't want to have to create a net new application. So how can I create this connection, and how can I do that in the context of 6 different companies that I'm trying to do this with? Because all that the sort of yeoman's work of creating a blockchain application is actually writing the business logic, is sort of customizing the integrations. You shouldn't be, in our opinion, you shouldn't be spending hours and months manually deploying sort of a ledger network and monitoring the health of nodes and figuring out how to write APIs. And those are the sorts of things that your cloud provider and your partner should be able to come to the table and provide. So we've taken a few steps to make it easier. And by no means am I claiming that it's easy to build a blockchain application. I'm sure many of the folks in this room would take issue with that. But I think what we've tried to do is make it easy by doing 3 things. One is we've populated sort of these pre-configured networks in a variety of topologies using a variety of ledgers in the Azure Marketplace. So, Chris was mentioning Marley Gray. Marley spent 2 or 3 months just figuring out in the early days how to deploy an Ethereum network, multi-member, multi-region across several companies in Azure. We've sort of codified that into templates that make it super easy to get up, define your network topology, define your infrastructure, and get started. The second thing we did was we looked at the types of applications we were building with customers and identified these concentric circles of relevant cloud services that you need to build these new applications. I need to be able to ingest messages from an IoT device and translate it into the format that's expected by the blockchain's native API so I can trigger a smart contract. I need to be able to take data off the ledger and pull it into an off-chain database like SQL or Cosmos DB or MySQL so that I can start to analyze what the heck's happening between these companies and maybe visualize that through something like Tableau or Power BI. I need to be able to link my blockchain-based identities to a federated identity system like Active Directory so that you don't have to log in and interact with other consortium participants with a 21 character Ethereum hash. You want to just be able to use your Skype ID, your Exchange ID. And so we started working on those integrations, and we built a really simple interface so that as a practitioner, as someone building these applications, really what you're doing is you're defining the specifications of the network and who gets to play, and then it deploys a very sort of Microsoft-looking web app for you. So you spend 90% of your time on understanding the state machine, understanding, who are the roles, what are the responsibilities, how do you codify that into a state machine, and how do you write that in the code of the ledger of your choice, so you could just drop that into the harness and it auto-populates an application for you. We've done this. I think one of the unique things about Microsoft is, we don't have a ledger. We're not building a ledger. We don't have SQL Server blockchain version. We're not going to. I think our view is that this technology will continue to evolve and mature in the open, and there's really no one-size-fits-all ledger. Customers have come to us asking for Quorum, asking for Hyperledger Fabric, asking for Corda, asking for parity, and so while there are a handful that we work with most often, that we're most comfortable with, we have a sort of a long history of working with the ledgers that our customers are demanding, and so the marketplace is filled with sort of the ledger and topology of your choice. Like I said, we've sort of pre-built a set of connections that we feel like are super important for building these applications, so you can connect this blockchain application to your cloud infrastructure without a whole lot of heavy lifting. And then, as I mentioned, we have this tool called Azure Blockchain Workbench, which we released at our Build conference in downtown in April. We've seen tremendous progress, customers that are building with this tool across industries, and it's super easy to sort of spin up and get started. And what I think it allows us to do early on, and acknowledging that this space is still super nascent, is articulate a point of view on how these new applications should be architected. What are the sets of services that are required? How to handle privacy and confidentiality? How do you interact with off-chain data? How do you do messaging and eventing and routing? All the things that we traditionally have known how to do in the context of a single-party app. How do you do that in a multi-party application environment? How do you architect that? So it's some really exciting work. There's a tremendous amount of documentation that's available on docs.microsoft.com. I think I have some links here at the end that I can point you to, but we have sample smart contracts. We have code samples for all sorts of state machines and workflows that we've already architected and already written in Solidity that you can just drop in. And there's great documentation on just how to build one of these applications in the cloud, because I think the core focus of what we've been trying to do is how can we make it simpler to build these things? How can we get your mind off of scaffolding and onto the smart contract, accelerate the time to value for companies that are trying to do this? Because there's a whole heck of a lot of hard work understanding how to govern these things, how to write the smart contracts, and so we want to take the cloud development burden off of the developer's shoulders. And we want to take it off your shoulders because, as I said, I think the core focus here is just writing the logic. That's the thing that we can't do for you. That's the thing that we can't help with. Slide's not supposed to be in there. So here's what I'd say. I mean, I think if you're looking to sort of take that first step, if you're interested in building out a sort of a shared application with a consortium, there's a demo available on at this link at the top, where myself and our head of product, Mark Mercuri, sort of walk through in two different videos. How do you use the tool, and where are the right resources to help you get started? There's a tremendous amount of documentation, some sample smart contracts available, like I said, on docs.microsoft.com. And we have a forum where my engineering counterparts, Brenda Lee, Ziad Rajabi, the sort of ever-expanding group of Azure blockchain engineers, we sit and we have hundreds of customers that are in this forum, asking questions of us and also asking questions of one another. And so I would encourage you to join the conversation and check us out. I think I'm running out of time, so I'm going to head out. Thank you guys for having me.